Under the Sign of Rebellion is the fourth full length from Rebaelliun, and this is a basically a band you would know if you were a fan of Crisian in the '90s. I think that this is, well, certainly the early 2000s, and this is a band that was often accused of sort of, along with many other bands from Brazil, of taking that brutal percussive style that Crisian had led with in the late '90s and became popular for in the early 2000s, and sort of making it their own gig. And you can see I've named quite a few bands here between Abhorrence, Nefast, Mental Horror, Ophiolatry, and those were very different bands. Now, this band is more along the lines of the Angel Corpse and the Centurion type of thing, where they were leaning towards that sort of militaristic beat. They were leaning towards a lot of the Morbid Angel influence of those sounds, and that a lot of that came from Blessed Are the Sick, and less so Covenant. A lot of these other bands, and Crisian included, weren't necessarily right there. They were maybe more influenced by Deicide or different things. And these are nuances that you'll understand if you know those classics front and back. You know what Angel Corpse kind of brought to the table back then. And there were other bands in Poland and a lot of other places that also contributed to that sound in the late '90s and early 2000s. So this band shouldn't be seen as a Crisian clone, but certainly a band of their era. And I think that that's more important as we look at the world stage around that time and we start to see bands in that style. And like when this was an important band, who was playing what, and when their first record came out, they were right there neck and neck with Centurions, Choronzonic Chaos Gods. And that's another uh, Burn the Promised Land and that record are very underrated records from 1999 if you enjoy this style, which is not quite Black Death. It's more related to just death metal and the classic style of it and giving it its extra bump up in terms of extremity. So that's still what this band does as they come back with their fourth record. Their last one was in 2016, and that record felt like it was more like a follow-up to what The Order was doing. The Order was Fabio Penna, his band that he started with members of Nefast, and that was sort of a more groove-oriented thing. And this record pulls back to kind of what people liked about my favorite record from the band, which is Annihilation. So let's cut into a song and just hear what this new record sounds like. So the singles of this album should tangentially remind you of that era where bands like Angel Corpse and whatnot were, even Hate Eternal and again Crisian, they were kind of on top of the world. They were introducing a new level of brutality, which a lot of the bigger bands were also picking up on. And I think that Rebaelliun, they are kind of cursed to always feel like an also ran another band in that style, and they're never going to get top billing in that sense, I don't think. But they have been persistent in terms of pulling back into that groove and still finding their brutality and the technical aptitude that is expected of the band beyond 2001. I don't think the last record fully pulled that off, and I feel like this one does, and that's kind of why I'm kind of excited about it. Is that it feels like it's a much better record than the Hell's Decrees. So that's really it. If you know what this band does, they're doing it all over this record, and what that means is it is that a little bit militaristic in its beat. It is very brutal, and it does incorporate a lot of groove, since that is now a part of their sound even more than it was in the past. So this isn't necessarily a return to Burn the Promised Land, or even necessarily the second album in full, but it does feel like this is that same band. And unfortunately, the bassist vocalist has passed since they recorded this, and you can tell this came from a lot of hard times and aggression. So, at the very least, we get one big album out of him before he went, and overall, I think this is just a fantastic death metal record in this style, which I think it will both incite a lot of nostalgia in people who miss this era of death metal, and how simply and effectively it was kind of brutalized out, but also it should just kind of re-educate some people on what death metal was back then compared to kind of the wiffle ball fest that it can be now, in terms of the old school slop that we get a lot of the time. So, for me, this is a high recommendation. I really like this style of death metal in general. This is a fine example of it, and it's great to see Rebaelliun came back and put out a record that was worthy of their early works, which are still appreciable and fine works. So, check those out. Check this out, and it'll be out on Friday. You can read the review for more thoughts and reminiscence, and see what you think.